welcome to the beginning of the genre module for the first year series of workshops. Here in the first module, this part of the genre module, we're going to talk about summary. Pretty basic skill that many of us kind of presume we're really talented at doing. We do it all the time, but we might want to revisit it just so we can have a greater understanding of why we summarize in the academy or at a university or in a college classroom beyond our normal ability to kind of recount certain events. So in this workshop, we're going to spend some time defining what a summary is, just to make sure we revisit it, understand it, and agree on what that thing is and why we do it and to what end. We're also going to talk a little bit more specifically about what makes it an academic summary as opposed to, say, a Netflix summary. You know, what is this video I'm about to watch, or YouTube clip summary? And specifically, we're going to get into this idea of questions of what, description, versus questions of how, analysis, and questions of why, evaluation, to kind of situate what it is about summary that's specific and oftentimes overlooked in our reading process. So when we talk about summary, we can take the word apart pretty simply. It's a familiar word. We see it in a lot of other words. But this idea of summing, the parts made total, right? So when you look at a text, what are the whole, and what is the whole rather, and how can you take it apart into smaller pieces to add it up? Everything that's made of multiple parts, and everything in reality is kind of made of multiple parts, right, can be taken apart and explained in a list of features, right? These are the components of it. So a laptop, for example, may have a keyboard. It may have a touchpad, an LCD or LED, a frame that holds that. We can break things down into small pieces, right? Fashion, clothes, we can break apart. Our outfits, a top, a bottom, shoes. Things can be broken down from smaller, rather from bigger to smaller pieces. So when we're talking about summary then, what we're really talking about is breaking things apart into smaller features to focus in on them and see how they're comprised. Academically, what we're talking about, it depends, right? So when you take a chemistry class and you write a chemistry lab, the abstract or summary you write in that class is necessarily different from what you might write as an introduction in a white paper for, say, your business writing class, or a literary review, for some sort of annotated bibliography, for example, in a college-level lit class. These are all summary assignments. The genre is the same. It's reductive, right? This idea of a précis, of a shortening. But they're different by genre, because if you wrote a chemistry lab summary for an English class, you might find that it doesn't go so hot. There's a difference in voice, a difference in tone. The style is necessarily different. So whenever you write a summary, you want to be sure that you consider what are the specific constraints in which I'm operating. For our purposes, for the first year writing course, you're writing a summary of an academic text for a literary audience for rhetorical purposes, to focus in on the rhetorical aspects of it, to kind of parse it out. So to that end, we talk about summary, we talk about what's. And this is kind of the boring part of summary, right? Because really it's just making things that are obvious, or the things that seem apparent to us, notes, things we can look at. So you think about the rhetorical reading notes you complete for your readings. You're taking apart the text and asking questions. Who wrote it? When was it written? What was going on in the world at that time, right? These factual statements that kind of comprise the generality of it. And we talk about these what features. So when you're taking a summary of a text, you want to think about what those what features are. And look at your rhetorical reading notes handout. When you look at that RN worksheet, you see a lot of these what questions. How is the thing comprised? What are its parts, right? So who's written the text? Who's the author? What do you know about the author? Why is that author famous? What should we know about that author? Is he an expert, or is she an expert in her field? Are they relatively unknown? Are they young? Are they old? Are they dead? Did they write in the 21st century, the 20th century? What was going on during that moment in which that piece of writing was produced? That has matter, right? That affects the way we read something. If it's outdated, do we take it as seriously? Do we see it as historical or vestigial, or somehow just important because it was important once upon a time? So context, right? What actions are the authors taking in this text? So one thing we often overlook when we think about a text is we say, oh, that text talks about this, or that text does this. And really, the text is just a location or a container in which the author is doing things, right? So for example, in James Paul G's essays, he's arguing, he's illustrating, he's discussing, he's figuring out something, he's explaining. He's this actor in a text who's doing things. And it's important to remember that the role of the author here is paramount. That's the person who is actively discussing things with you through his, her, their writing in front of you. What kind of text is it? Again, these are factual questions, right? We can keep going. They're genre-based. So what kind of text is it? Is it literary scholarship? Is it historiography? Is it a biochem report? Is it a white paper on changes to plain language standards in the White House? All different kinds of documents you can kind of call on here, but if you don't know what kind of text it is, you need to find out. You want to find out how that text represents its genre, how it operates within whatever discipline it kind of operates in. Similarly, what are the major points here? How does the text work? What are the steps it walks through? If you had to explain it as a narrative, the text does this first, or the author says this first, does this second, accomplishes this third, as a result does this. Look at the rhetorical reading notes. You get this question of structure. How is the text structured? Does it have subheadings? Does it have sub-subheadings? Are things kind of stepped like an outline? Or is it more like a 5-paragraph essay kind of thing where everything is just paragraph, 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 and the reader has to kind of do the parsing? So if you had to draw it out in terms of steps, how many steps? For example, think of Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet, 5 acts and several scenes within each act. So you could break apart a whole play into 5 sentences, right? 5 acts. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5, structure. So you're kind of looking for how the thing is comprised. Lastly, what are the key terms and examples? So if you're talking about G, you're talking about discourse and discourse analysis, it's probably relevant to note what is discourse and discourse analysis or discourse community. What are the terms that he brings up that you didn't know that seem kind of key-wordy or important? These are all what questions? These are all the things that when you read from the first to the last moment of a text, you're thinking about passively. You want to be thinking about them actively as you're annotating the text and asking those questions, these whats. What is it? Who is this? When did this happen? Because as you're doing this, you're building towards this opportunity to see the text as functioning in a larger conversation. And what you want to be thinking about as you're taking notes on it is, how can you describe this text comprehensively, accurately, briefly, from an independent perspective with a neutral tone? Because you're not trying to embed yourself as the reader in the text. You may know James Paul G, but chances are you don't know him personally, and he's not written about you in his readings and writings on gamification or on discourse analysis, so you're not really present in his text to be summarized in his text if you summarize, say, one of his chapters. So you want to build towards this idea of neutrality and independence in your tone when you talk about what G does. So let's take a minute here to think about, and you can kind of write this down, answer this quiz question. What are the 5 elements we just discussed in terms of writing a good or successful academic summary? So take a minute here and answer that question. So now that you've answered that question, moved on to this next part of the workshop idea, here's the question for you. We're going to do a guided practice here. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see this picture by Magritte. René Magritte was an artist of the early 20th century. He had a lot of neat things that had a lot of layers to them. And here what we have is his painting, The Human Condition. If I ask you to summarize it, well, one, I'm sure you're going to say, how do you summarize a piece of art, let alone how do you do it in one sentence? But go ahead and take a minute here and write out how you would describe this. Imagine you're on the telephone with someone and you're in front of this painting at the museum and you're just blown away and you want to explain to this person, what is this painting? But you only have 30 seconds or a minute of call time left. How would you explain it in a pair rather than a sentence? Really focused in that way. So take a minute, just write that down or type it out. Kind of announce that to yourself. What is this text? It's not easy to summarize something, let alone into one sentence. So imagine how you have to take 25 pages of text and turn it into 250 words or half a page or a paragraph of language, right? This exercise, though, is aimed at practicing that, so you can consider these kinds of questions. You look back to your rhetorical reading notes, and you think, what kinds of questions can I ask about this text? So I have a comprehensive understanding of it that I can share, that I'd be accurate with what I'm describing, but brief at the same time from an independent and neutral perspective. So we'll take this picture for our purposes here for practice, and we can ask those same questions. Well, who designed or who has rendered this picture? Well, we know it's René Magritte here, and we want to talk about how he managed to do this. So we have an author's name, right? René Magritte. We have the title of the piece, The Human Condition, and its year when it was actually published. So early 20th century, post-World War I, right? pre-World War II, things are changing in Europe, things are going on, the human condition is the name of the piece. We start looking at it. What is it? What's a painting? We agree on that, right? So we start getting factual about it. What's in it? What are its elements? You've got a curtain rod. You have these curtains. What color are they? What's in the background? What's in the foreground? We have this painting in the foreground on a tripod or easel, a painting of what we presume is behind it, right? In the background there, this window. So we have a painting of a natural landscape. So all these layers, right? So you have the painting here that we're looking at, and inside of the painting is a second painting, and that painting is of the landscape within the first painting. So think about how complicated it is to explain all these points about one simple picture. Now think about how you're reading a chapter about a concept like discourse analysis or location and geography and personal development, and you're wondering, how am I going to summarize all of that in 250 words? Start making a list, start inventorying the text, and when you come back to this question about these whats, these categories, who's written it, what actions are taking place, or what's going on, what's the scene made of, what kind of text is it, what are the major parts and points of the text, as well as what are the key terms or examples in the text. You can take any text apart, for example, this painting, and start taking it apart to make a list of its features. And that's what the summary idea is, to take something apart and focus on what it really is. What are its parts? If you don't know who Rene Magritte is, great, go to Google, go to Wikipedia and find out who he is, what he painted, what kind of paint movements he participated in. It's not very hard anymore. It's 2016 now. You're able to look up all kinds of information. So look up Rene Magritte, look up the painting, see what kind of movement he participated in terms of painting. Look up the materials used in here. How would you describe that? Is it impressionistic? Is it realistic? Is it surrealistic? Here that might be appropriate, right? For Magritte, you have this painting on top of a painting, in a painting, all kinds of layering. But it's so mundane, right? It's a natural landscape. It's just a set of curtains here drawn, so one could look through here. Consider how you might explain this to someone, what kind of facts you want to record about it. So some things for you to consider as you're moving forward and writing these summaries. The assignment directions are pretty clear, but these are things that students nonetheless overlook. So when you're looking at your draft and you're ready to revise it, make sure that it has substance and it meets the minimum requirements. Is your paper in MLA format? Is it double-spaced? Is a paragraph indented? Is your font 12-point Times New Roman? Have you only had one paragraph? Because if you exceed a paragraph, it's not a one-paragraph summary anymore. Make sure that it's of the right length and the right format. Make sure your first sentence is a good topic sentence. And what does that mean? A good topic sentence is one that summarizes the theme of that paragraph. So if your first sentence doesn't name the author, doesn't name the text, and kind of offer a statement of the central text source main idea, it's probably not as encompassing as it could be to help your reader. Because remember, you're writing this for an audience. You're participating in a greater conversation. So if you're trying to explain an idea to someone, you might start generally before you get to specific. Make sure that you also look at the rubrics to consider what kinds of questions you might ask about your own summary mastery, right? The idea that your document's in the third person point of view, that you don't draw on pronouns like I, you, or that it's in the present tense, so you describe the text as an ongoing text. Making sure that your evidence is not just a list of bullet points in a paragraph stuck together, but instead something that you've thought about. You've asked that question. Well, why does my second sentence come after my first sentence? Does it do something? Does it answer a question? Is it sequential? Do I use transitions and the like? So when you go through this document, and it seems really easy on the surface, write a 250-word summary, but there's a lot going on there. So you want to make sure that you're building towards a comprehensive, accurate, and brief description of the text in which you take an independent and neutral position as an exterior third-party viewer and summarizer. If you have any questions here, now's a good time to start reflecting on what the summary means to you and how you're going to apply this kind of idea going forward as you read more and more texts here.